Our next guest for the Mindset Shift is Orlaith Blaney, Chief Communications and Marketing Officer at Ervia. Orla has over 23 years CEO and C-suite executive experience, leading businesses and teams in both the public and private sector. She joined Ervia in 2016 after years in the advertising agency business. She was CEO of Mccann Dublin and was appointed into the role at just 32, the first female managing director of an international network agency in Ireland. She's an advocate for diversity and equity in business and was on the advisory board of the Women's Executive Network and was Honorary Secretary of the International Women's Forum. Welcome to the Mindset Shift. Really great to have you and really looking forward to chatting to you.
Hello, Tim, and delighted to be here.
So the Mindset Shift talks about the business person, but before that we try and find out about the individual, who makes up this person that is so successful in business and dealing with the challenges that we're facing today. So tell me a little bit about your background.
So I went to Our Lady's School in Terranure, and I grew up in Templeogue, and I went to UCD after I finished my Leaving Cert. So I did social science in UCD, and then I went on to do postgraduate work in marketing. And then after that, I got my FOSS training program where I got paid €60 or £60 a week in those days to join the very first ad agency I joined, which was called Dimension. And so that's kind of like a brief potted history of my kind of schooling and college. I also, when I was growing up, my father was a publican. And I spent kind of from the age of about 16 working in the pubs. And I think that gave me the first real kind of interest, I suppose, in the world of business. And he taught me a lot of things about serving pints on a busy Friday night and looking after customers in his pub. And I learned a huge amount about business just from being in the business from just a young age and learning a lot about customers. So yeah, it was interesting.
So if we take your pot and we turn it upside down, and let's just go back to Templeogue. So tell me about the family structure, who was in the family. Obviously your dad was a publican, but, tell me about that background at that point, back in the early stages of Templeogue.
Yeah, so my mum and dad actually are both from the north of Ireland, and they grew up in the Troubles, and they wanted to basically get away from the north. And when they got married in 1969, they took a decision. They're both from very big families, and they took a decision to move down to Dublin to get away from, I suppose, all the challenges of the north at that time. So I actually was born in Portadown, and I've got my northern accent now. And when I was 4, when the family moved to Dublin. I'm the eldest of 5, the eldest of 6 actually, of 5 brothers. So 6 in the family, and I'm the eldest. And I think, again, I suppose being the only girl with 5 brothers was, again, a really interesting challenge, just in terms of both running the business, but also, I suppose, in terms of, kind of feeling like I was kind of minding them all the time. And they're great. I mean, when I was the eldest, it was great fun. But I suppose, the boys there were a lot of the kind of family were involved in rugby. So I have a brother who's a professional sailor, the eldest. And then I have 5 brothers who played rugby at all different levels, for Leinster, for Munster, for Bristol, for London Irish. So I spent a lot of my younger days going around on buses to go to rugby matches and traveling for Munster games back in the 90s, and spent a lot of time actually, supporting them in their rugby careers, as well as helping out in the business and helping out at home.
So just talk to me about the impact that had on your parents, like leaving their home. As you say, they're leaving because of the Troubles and they want to bring up their family in safer environments. But what impact had it on them?
I think I always remember growing up, Tim, they always used to watch the UTV news, and I could never understand why on earth we'd be watching Good Evening Ulster and everyone else was watching RTE. So I think I felt they probably missed the north and mostly their family. And I remember even going up to visit family, when I was younger, and going over the border and carrying in the back of the car when we'd be going over the border, when there would be, police officers with guns. And, the north was a really troubled place during that time. And even going up to the north to visit them, I always felt a little bit kind of scared. I was young, but I do think they definitely missed their family and their friends in the north. But I think probably they had so much on their plate with, having a family of 6 eventually and running a, business, that they were full on with that. So yeah, I think they definitely missed the north.
And Dad was a publican. Where was the pub?
So we had a couple of pubs, actually. The first pub we had was called Blaney's, the Long Bar in Dolphin's Barn. And it was a real experience working there, in terms of, I suppose, the kind of challenge at the time. There was drugs in Dolphin House. There was, lots of, I suppose, kind of family challenges in terms of running a business in an area like that. And I was always an extremely busy pub. I suppose there was christenings and funerals and, family allowance day. And we always was busy from when you opened in the morning till late at night. And so that was one pub. And then when we sold that, we went on to a pub called the Oak in Dame Street. I used to love working there because you'd have the Olympia and you'd have Dublin Castle, and you'd have a totally different type and profile of customer. And we used to have people coming in like Mary Black, and people who were performing the Olympia would come in for pints and drinks. Con Houlihan from the Irish Press, he used to come in. So I used to love the different dynamic. And from all of the different experiences in the pub, I just got to meet so many interesting people with stories and kind of lives that they kind of would come in and tell you over a pint, while you'd be maybe on a Sunday afternoon, it would be a bit quieter and you could get time to spend with them. And then we also owned the Hill in Ranelagh, which was again a really kind of a different dynamic again in terms of the profile of customers and the different people that would come in. So yeah, Blaney's, the Long Bar, the Oak in Dame Street, and the Hill in Ranelagh.
And talk to me about your mom, because obviously she's raising a family of 6 children, and she's supporting your dad in developing not just one pub but moving pubs, as you've just explained.
Yeah, my mom is just an unbelievable lady, as is my dad actually. But she really, I suppose, she had her hands full. She always was very focused on our education. And, even though I was working in the business, she was like really kind of keen for me to get a good leaving cert. And she used to put, huge emphasis on our education and spending time studying. And like every child doing their intercert or their leaving cert, I loved being out and about chatting to people, and getting me to stay in my room to study was not easy for her. And also I always remember as well, like the rugby gear. So with the lads playing rugby, our utility room used to be just full of rugby boots and mucky gear. So she not only had managing all of us in terms of just even the housework alone with 6 kids, so cooking, and she was a brilliant cook. I mean, to this day my husband says, can you get your mother to make her caramel squares? She was an amazing baker. She made all scones and treacle and lots of different almond squares, and she was really brilliant for cooking and baking, as well as minding all of us. So I really feel like, I learned so much from her, as well as my dad, from a business point of view. But she was always very encouraging, and she's a really hard worker. To this day, she won't sit down. She's all go.
And tell me, so you said you learned a lot from your mom and you learned a lot from your dad. So if you were to pick the top thing you learned from each of them, what would that be?
I think one of the interesting things about my dad was around the customer. I remember when I was working in the pub, he's used to always say to us, the customer, Orla, coming through that door for a pint after a hard day's work, or a husband and wife coming in, he used to say to me, when they'd come he said, always keep eye contact with the customer. So when the person walks through the door, look them in the eye. I go into pubs nowadays and the staff have their head down. They're not even, might be 5 minutes before, and it drives me mad if I go out. Not that I've been out to restaurants and bars recently, but it's driving me mad, that whole kind of not paying. So he really taught me that. And he was always I remember even things like, counting the money on a Friday night after a really busy night. And I used to always want to be the till with the most money. I used to be quite motivated by that. And he used to always say to me, look after the customer, and they'll come back. The business will be there. So really focus on them. So yeah, I think he taught me a lot about looking after customers when they came into the business. And I think for my mum, I think her work ethic, her appetite for just getting things done and not procrastinating and doing things in the moment and getting on with stuff. I mean, she was, she's just highly productive. She's like 3 mothers in one nearly, in terms of just the amount of things she got through, and as well as supporting my father in the business, and it went through lots of challenging times, when the pub maybe wasn't doing well, or we were kind of investing in the business and looking for staff. Used to be a real head of staff stay and that you could trust. That was a really big part of, again, but the work ethic, I think, for my mum would have been the thing that stands out.
A couple of points in that order. One is about your mum, that her work ethic, and she was busy all the time. But I'm really impressed the fact you slipped in the word productive, because that's the 21st century word. I don't think your mom in the 70s and 80s would have said she was productive. She just said she was just busy.
Tim, I learned I was on an IMI course and there last year, and one of the modules was called Breaking Up with Busy. And I was saying to Morgan Cummins from the Talent Hub, I was saying to him that, we've got to stop saying in business that we're really busy, and we've got to say we're really kind of productive and we've achieved business outcomes. So you're right. She definitely wouldn't use the word "I'm very productive."
The point about your dad and the customer is fascinating, because obviously as your career went on in a business sense, that foundation obviously became very important to you. My own father, God rest his soul, worked in a bar. He was a bar manager at one point in time in his life. And when I used to go for a drink with him later on, when I became older and when he was older, he'd always be talking about the customer. He'd be always saying, when he'd walk into a bar like you would have just talked about, did they look at him? Did they make eye contact? Did they make him feel wanted? Did they make him feel he was special, even though he might be spending whatever, 2 or 3 quid on 2 pints at the time? And later on in his life, he'd be saying the barman must always be busy, or the bar person must always be busy. They must always be cleaning glasses. They must always look to be productive, is the word we'll use today for a bit of fun. And I really think that, sometimes we've lost focus on the customer in the sense of business, because ultimately customers are people, if you take it down in the most basic sense.
Yeah.
And we need to make people feel very important, whether they work for us, whether they work with us, or whether we serve them as customers. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And look, I've worked in the advertising business like for over nearly 20 years. I'm working in the public sector now, and like time and time again, it comes back to relationships and building trust. And like whether it's somebody walking into a pub on a Friday night who's had a bad day, or a client walking into Mccann's to solve a business problem from a creative point of view, or in Irish Water where we're solving many, many problems, 24/7. And I think tone is so important. So, if you're communicating with people at any level, that kind of listening skill, understanding, really kind of, I suppose, coming up with a solution, like that's what kind of a lot of life is about. If you're in personal relationships with your family, your husband, your partner, your children, like they're all life skills. That listening piece and that looking after people is at its most basic. And I think that's kind of, really, really important.
A couple of points in that. I was saying that people want to know that you care before they care what you know. And you can only show them you care if you not just communicate with them, but if you really engage with them. And you cannot engage with them if you don't listen. And that's one of the things I think is the hardest for many people, is that we're thinking of what to say next instead of actually listening to the person, and from whatever they say, then create the next point of the conversation. So your point is so valid, Orla, that listening is critical and an underused art in my experience.
Yeah, and I have to check myself. I'd say if you were asking any of my colleagues that I work with or people that I've worked with in my career, I'm a talker. Like I love chatting and talking, and I have to constantly remind myself, even have to write it sometimes in my diary, to kind of slow down and listen. And it's such, because we're all so under pressure in business to get the thing done and get an output and get an outcome. And no matter what kind of business you work in, that pressure doesn't go away. So I think it has trained us incorrectly. That pressure cooker means that we just have to get outputs as opposed to getting the right output. So I agree with that totally, Tim.
Just a couple of points to develop on that. One is that talkers can be great listeners, but because they're really good talkers, people misunderstand that they're not listening. So that's one point. The second point about my philosophy is get it done right. Don't get it done. Because the problem with just getting it done is, in many situations, we have to come back and correct it. Where if we take the extra bit of time at the start, and when I work with clients, I talk to them about that. Let's get it done right. Let's communicate it properly. You know, I mean, take Irish Water, you know, the communication challenge that they've had over the last number of years for different reasons. But some of it is because there's such a pressure to get information. Oh, we got to say something. And, you know, when we say something, not all the time we say the right thing.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting just currently in today's dynamic around, you know, what the work that the HSE are doing around rolling out the vaccine and communicating. And, you know, I would have said at the outset, the work that the government did with Tony Holohan and the comms around that, you know, was really considered. And the first, you know, kind of couple of months were absolutely fantastic. But I think I listened to an interview yesterday on radio with somebody talking about like what's actually involved in rolling out a vaccine to the whole of the Irish population, and the stock coming in, whether it's, you know, we're going to use it for certain cohorts and age groups, the logistics and the operation that is the vaccine rollout. And people don't have time to listen. And people are just trying to get, when's my date? That's all I care about. When am I getting the actual jab? When's it going to be done? And actually what Paul Reid and Tony Holohan and an amazing number of experts are trying to do is the right thing for the Irish public. And we're desperately impatient. And there's a lot of, I think, unjustified criticism. You know, yes, the communication could be better, but what's going on logistically behind the scenes, if you take time to listen to the reality, is really, really compelling. And I think, you know, for what it's worth, and my view is that they've actually done some stuff extremely well, extremely well.
I would work with a lot of clients during the last 12 months and helping them get through COVID. And one of the things I talk to the leadership about is the critical aspect of communication, that there can be no ambiguity, there can be no uncertainty. And even though on many occasions, the people you've just mentioned there have done a really good job, they haven't done it consistently well enough, in my view. And the reason is they give slightly different views of the same information. And what that does for people like you, me, Orla, that gives us uncertainty. Because don't forget, we are, as you said, we just want the date. You know, we all want the date. We want to be vaccinated and get our life back to what we saw as normal pre-COVID. So when I get a message that says, okay, that the over 50s will have it, you know, on the first week in April. And within an hour, somebody else says, well, we're hoping to have the over 50s vaccinated within the first week in April. Those two messages are not the same. And then I say, geez, I have a doubt now. I have a bit of uncertainty now. So one of the things that I would say to organizations about communication is it must be consistent, it must be unambiguous, and it must be very clear, and you must sustain the message. And if you're changing the message, say, based on new evidence or new supplies or whatever the message is that you have to give, we now are moving the date to the second week in April.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting though, and I think that the reality, and we all hear about this, you know, challenge of uncertainty, and like uncertainty in business is a reality, and it more so than it ever was. And I find now, like I work in an environment where, so say there's a burst pipe, right? The amount of people, that need to be communicated to in terms of vulnerable customers, dealing with stakeholders, the regulator, the EPA, the government to update in terms of the scope of what we need to deliver. And then we also have this massive time pressure because people want the information this minute, now. And in order to get the right information, we're desperately impatient for information. And I think you're absolutely correct about the consistency piece and making sure that we say something, we're consistent. But things are changing so quickly. And at the time somebody went out with a piece of comms on a date, they believed that based on the information that they had at that time, that was correct. And it wasn't that they were trying to mislead us or, you know, bring us in a wrong direction. So I think as anybody in business these days, there are so many moving parts on everything that your ability to be consistent and clear and follow up and everything to be correct is a massive task.
And just let's tease that point for you.
Yeah.
It's a massive task. And also you're talking to people who are not listening properly because they have so many other things going on in their world.
Yeah.
Let's take the HSE analogy we were using. People are worried about their lives, their loved ones' lives. They're worried about their job. They're worried about their businesses. They're worried about their income. there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on at the highest end of the scale, and then at the other end of the scale, they're worried about going on holidays. You take the two extremes. So they're not really listening with the intent that the communicator is delivering the message. But I would believe, and I've argued this for many years, and I've believed this fully, and my business portrays this. The sender's job is to deliver the message so that the receiver understands it. So if you have a change of message, and take Irish Water, that you have a leak and you've got all these stakeholders you've got to advise, and then for some reason the process changed, you've got to come out immediately and say, we've made a change. And at the very start of the sentence, say, we're making a change, which then they say, because if we expect people to have listened to the first one fully or taken it in fully, we're mistaken. But I'm going to take you back, though, in your own world now. So you've 5 brothers who play sport. You have a professional sailor and people who play professional with Munster and Leinster. Was sport any part of your upbringing in your days?
That's a wounding question, okay? Well, I was really woeful at hockey, okay?
Okay.
And I could remember playing Our Ladies against Mount Anvil on a really, really, really cold January morning up in some pitch, and I just really never was cut out for sport. But growing up in a family that was so sporty, and like my dad, was a jockey, he was a scratch golfer, he sailed around Ireland, he did there was a lot of sport in my family, and it's actually something that to this day, I did a couple of triathlons about 10 years ago just to prove that I'm not rubbish. I took something quite, I did the Chicago triathlon 5 years in a row, and no one checked my times. I was incredibly slow, but really bad at hockey, done a few triathlons, do a bit of gym work, and a few walks, but nothing like I wish I had, really, because I think it's fantastic for your health. Fantastic.
Well, I'll give you some here that is saying, when you're talking to your brothers about your triathlons, okay, in a sprint, it's only the winner matters. In a triathlon, it's those who finish matter.
Well, I did the very last one I did, which was about 2 years ago. I did them in Chicago, partly because the field was so big that no matter how awful I was, I wouldn't have been last. I think something like 8,000 people do the Chicago Triathlon. It's massive. But there was a heat wave, the last one I did, and I was actually a DNF, did not finish. I did the swim, the mile swim, and then the 40k bike ride. And when I got off the bike, I just had nothing left. And I actually had to give in and say, I'm not going any further, and went back to the hotel to wait for the rest of them to finish. So yeah, sport wouldn't have been a high point for me at all.
And how did you deal with that? Because as you said, you're in this household full of sport, and obviously your dad was very successful in his own sporting career. So how did you deal with that? You're the oldest, first of all, in the family, right? You have no sister, you have 5 brothers, which has its own different challenges and benefits, but different challenges. Sport is really a common factor amongst the family and the family background and the discussions, and you're not really strong at it. And how did you deal with it individually, from your own point of view?
I got stuck into my career.
But as a young person in school and in primary school and in second level, how did you deal with it?
Really, it's a good question, Tim. I don't know if I ever really evaluated it in any way. I think I played hockey. I also had asthma. So I had really bad asthma. So it meant that I had to get notes, at school not to be able to do gym lessons or to not play hockey and stuff. So I had a health challenge as well at the time. I don't know. I think it's more as I got older. I was like, gosh, I wish I'd been better in sport. But yeah, and I think as well, I was good in the pub. I was good with customers. I was good. I got a lot of, even when I was 16, 17, I got a lot of personal gratification of, and I'm big on the cleaning. And I used to love the pub being spotless and the bottles being shiny and the toilets being clean. And that's something I learned from my mother. She's really into the whole cleaning buzz. And I used to get a lot of personal satisfaction out of those kind of things, even when I was younger.
Great point. And a great point for listeners to hear. Because we're not successful with against our siblings in some aspect of life, and in this case, in your world, it was a sporting life. It doesn't mean we can't be successful at the same point in time in something else. So, you took great pride and it's obvious that you enjoyed engaging with the customers in all the 3 pubs that you worked in. You obviously took great pride in making sure the appearance of your public house, and that, as a customer came in, that it appeared clean to the best of your ability. So sometimes when we're siblings, we look at our older siblings and we say, oh my God, he or she is wonderful, okay, for whatever he or she or they're all tending to do. And I just love the fact that you've called out clearly, sport wasn't what, you were as strong as you would look back and like to be, but you were really good at other things and you made yourself successful at those things. And that's a great, ability to have, and more people should do that. I call it focusing on your own lane. Look down your own lane in a race. Don't be worried about the other lanes. You can't control the other lanes. All you can control is the lane that you're running in.
The bit I hate most in, coaching and business is, like, what are your weaknesses? Your strengths and your weaknesses, the SWOT analysis on yourself. And like, I am genuinely a big believer in playing to your strengths. What are the things you're really, really good at? And through the years, I've done lots of mentoring and coaching of people that I've worked with and people outside our organization through various different programs. And when they say, like, what about my weaknesses? I kind of freeze a bit, because if you're going to spend all your time, as you said, looking in the other lane at what you're not good at, I think it's really kind of hold you back just from, it sounds a bit cliche, like achieving your potential, but I think you really got to believe in the things that you're really strong at and make them work for you and for your life, your relationships, your career. That would be something would be keen.
That's very interesting, because when I coach clients and when I work in businesses, I talk about both sides in a balanced way. So I make the point, we've got to make our strengths stronger. That's what we really should focus on. I would challenge you to, Orla, we can't ignore our weaknesses.
No.
So what I would say to the clients I work with is that let's reduce the impact our weaknesses have on our performance. So, let's understand, we're not going to get rid of all our weaknesses. We're humans. We have individual weaknesses. That's the reality of life. But let's look at and realize, first of all, what our real weaknesses are and what our real strengths are. Because sometimes we have perceptions of both, which are not true. They're just perceptions. Somebody said you're good at this, so I must be good at it. And somebody said you're not good at this, so I must not be good. Let's find out what our real strengths and weaknesses are. Let's make sure our strengths are to the forefront all of the time. And let's make sure we reduce the impact of our weaknesses. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that. So I would just say,
look, I agree. And I think, like, one of the things as you progress in your career is that kind of self-awareness piece. And like, I'm a big believer in the 360 feedback and getting it from outside of your own perception. And look, I did a coaching thing recently, and the lady smiled when I shared with her all my various reports over the years on my profile, my 360s, my personality, the feedback I've had from bosses. And I have actually a folder of all that stuff. And I take it out every now and then to kind of really check myself. And things change for you too as you get more experience, and you kind of have to adapt. So no, I don't disagree at all with that. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you can't go through life. I remember when I first, when I was running the ad agency that I was involved in, and I became the MD, and I was only 32. And I remember when I got the role, the finance director came in, and like, I was the creative person, the client facing person, and she brought me in a folder with like 60-page contracts to read, and the lease on the building, and the latest update in terms of the financial reporting. And look, I can read a balance sheet. I know I used to say it's very basic, like the pub: money in, staff, money out, what's left, if anything. So I kind of got the basic principles, but I remember in the beginning being so intimidated by all of that stuff, because it's not my natural kind of where I want to put my energy. So I think part of it as well is recognizing, as you said, the stuff that doesn't give you as much energy and as much, kind of, and where you're really good to work with on the things you love doing. Of course, I'll sit down and read a contract, and I'll struggle through it, or I'll struggle through a balance sheet and look at a financial statement, but it's not where I get my energy from. And I think you're right. You've got to, really understand, how do you get that work done as well? But I think maybe just the balance, where do you put your effort?
And it's a very good point, that it is a balance, and we are strong in certain things, and we don't have expertise in other things. So when you became CEO at 32, you didn't have expertise in finance. That wasn't what got you the role of CEO. You had expertise in innovation, creativity,
customers, and doing things for others. So when you're faced with the fact that now you have other things to run your business, you've got to depend on experts. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And, learn enough to be able to engage with the experts, but let them be the experts. That would be my philosophy in different businesses that I run. Let the experts use their expertise and let me lead the experts, so to allow them and facilitate them to use their expertise.
Yeah, I think we all think we have to know everything about everything. And like, you just don't, and it's not possible. So I think that's absolutely right. Like, there are experts and people who have really good skill sets. And if you can provide the leadership, the direction, the feedback to shape the team or the plan, that's where you can really add the value, and not try and feel bad about the fact that you don't know what's on page 49 of the contract you've just read, because there's somebody on the team who's all over contracts and can help you with that. And so it's just about making those decisions, isn't it? Again, where to spend your time and get your energy so that you can actually, get good outputs and have good teams.
And if we could listen to those words you just said, we don't have to know it all, because we can't know it all. That's just not within our realm. We just, no matter how good we are, we don't know everything. So if we're good at one thing, somebody else will be better at another thing. And that's why teams work, when you get the best of all together. When you went to college, let's just go back to your college for a second, Orla.
Yes.
What was your plan? What was your big plan to go to college? What were you going to do?
When I first came out of school and I got my Leaving Cert, I went for an interview in Rathmines for the PR course. So I was originally interested in doing a year. When I went into the interview, they asked me to see my portfolio of published articles, at which point I kind of looked at them in complete amazement that I needed to show them that I think I'd written, I was head girl at school, and I think I'd written one report for the year-end magazine. So I had totally wasn't tuned into what I actually needed. And I was always interested in communication, but social sciences by its nature, in terms of the kind of things that you study in the social sciences, are very kind of like psychology, and they're kind of people oriented. So in social science in UCD, the course at the time allowed you to do a marketing stream and a business stream. So the course, when people go into social science, they can do social work. That's one kind of stream that you can become a social worker. And then the other option was to go for a more business oriented approach. So that's why I ended up, I think I put down arts, even arts in UCD. I think commerce I didn't have enough points for. So social science came out at the end. I also, though, when I did my work experience, I did Bernardo's in fourth year at school. I did social work up in Tala, and I continued to work a little bit with Vincent de Paul in Tala, after I left school. And so I was kind of quite socially conscious, I suppose. And then the other side, in terms of the business piece, like I said, that kind of drove me a little bit too. So social science gave me that option to kind of explore both things, and I ended up going into the business stream and really enjoyed it.
And what was college life like for you?
I came out of a school where I loved school, and like I said, I was head girl, so I was really loved school. And I think when I went my first year in UCD, I absolutely hated it. Partly because it was so big and I knew no one. And I took social science. I didn't have one person from my school in my class. So it was all brand new. And I really struggled in first year. I really did. I remember failing my exams in first year. And my mother was like, how could you fail? And she kind of knew, and I came home all full of tears with a piece of paper going like I failed. And she was like, well, and all my friends were heading off to somewhere like Ibiza for the summer for a 2-week holiday, and I had to stay home and repeat my exams. I'll tell you, it learned me a hard lesson. So yeah, so social science, as I said, gave me good kind of grounding, and as I said, in those social sciences and things that I think were relevant to me now.
Isn't it a great lesson, for us, because you went from being the head girl in second level school to being a stranger in a class in third level. And the adaptation for you was the real big challenge, even though obviously, and it's very clear in this chat, you're really very comfortable to talk to, you're great to engage with, you're really big into people. And yet when you're thrust in your first year in college into a strange environment where you're no longer king of the tree or queen of the tree, you're now just one of the three. It actually is interesting how it affected you.
Yeah, and I think genuinely, I found the first year really, really tough. And then I made a few friends, and I kind of got my kind of bit of confidence back. But I never was one for joining all, like, I suppose maybe when I went into college, I should have joined a few committees or a few societies and stuff. I never really got going with that stuff. Like, I was never doing leadershipy things in college. It was a funny time for me, actually. And then, you know, I was working in the pub as well, and I loved getting a little envelope on a Friday with my money, so I could have, you know, go into town and buy stuff. So yeah, I never really settled in UCD fully. By the end now, you know, I had lovely friends there and everything, but it's not like, I remember my school days brilliantly. And I, you know, UCD years, I would have said, like, whilst it was good, it was, I don't have the same feeling about my college years, I suppose.
That's very interesting, because, you know, most people would have the reverse view. They would see that, you know, they'd look fondly with their primary education. They would look at their second level education with mixed eyes and mixed views, but most people would love their college education because it would, you know, and for you, it was just a different experience. It doesn't mean it was better or worse, or it was just different.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's funny, like, everybody would be going to, like, you know, discos and parties and the bar and all. I wasn't a big drinker. And as I said, I was working in the family business. So, like, I didn't hang around UCD doing all that stuff. And I suppose that probably from a integration and a kind of getting to know people better, that probably, when I look back now, just that you've asked the question, I never even thought about it until you asked it today, just in terms of what my college experience was like. But I still, like, all of my friends today are either the girls I went to school with, who I'm still really close to, and then I suppose my people I've worked with would be kind of like more of my circle. But yeah, I haven't got many people in UCD that I, you know, would count as very close friends nowadays.
Interesting. So tell me then, you left college, and take me through the next period of time in your life before you became the CEO. So take me from your college up to the time of your first role as CEO.
Yeah, so I went on the FORCE course after I finished my UCD and my postgrad in marketing in the College of Marketing, and Mountjoy Square it was in those days. And I was looking for a role, and FORCE were offering a course where you got paid £60 a week, and they put you on a placement. And my first job was in a company called Dimension, which was led by Gary Joyce and Roddy Rowan. And it was an advertising agency, but it was much more about integration. And Gary Joyce was a phenomenal lady, and still is to this day, and somebody I would count as a mentor and a friend in terms of the kind of work. We launched Goodfellas Pizza onto the market probably about 22 years ago, and it was a brilliant project to take that brand from nothing to 70% of the frozen pizza market in 2 years. And we did everything for that client. So I really loved my days in Dimension, and I got to work with some fantastic people who are still in the industry today. People like Peter McPartlin and Justin Cullen, they're, you know, people that I would have worked with. A lady called Adrienne Dempsey, another amazing lady. So I got to work with a group of really, really talented people in Dimension. I started out in the PR division. So back to the PR thing, I eventually got to work in PR, Tim. And in those days, I had to fax the press release to Checkout magazine for Impulse, a deodorant that was launching a new variant, or Lynx Africa, which I see they're doing new ads for now. So I did a bit of PR, and then Dimension had like different divisions in terms of advertising and market research and direct marketing, and they had like different functions. So eventually I ended up getting just wider experience in that whole integrated space. So Goodfellas would have been a very big client, AIB, Aircom, like with some really great clients. And again, I really found that experience was probably about 6 years in Dimension before I left Dimension. I had worked on AIB, and Mccann's had won, it was a big account win for them in Ireland. They'd won Bank of Ireland. And we did a program called the 100 Steps to Better Banking by the year 2000. I don't know if you remember it, Tim, but it was a phenomenal piece of work at the time about improving things for customers. So I was back to where I started with the conversation. So that was, again, like the Mccann experience that I think I was with Mccann in total for 18 years between, and lots of different iterations of that business too. From, I suppose, you know, the kind of Bank of Ireland work that I did, but also, you know, eventually becoming, you know, the boss of that agency and getting a big opportunity. I remember I was 32 and I'd been working in the business, and Brian Sparks is another great colleague and was my boss in Mccann's when I joined, and he left to set up agency assessments. And this gentleman came in from London called Peter Davies, and he was going to run the agency while they looked for a new managing director. And he was with us for about a year. And I remember Mccann in London coming to me saying, Orla, you know, Peter can't stay forever. And, you know, we really need to help him find a new managing director for the Dublin office. And I remember he came in after and he said, look, I've interviewed people around town. And I really think like you can do the job. And I remember he said, I've been interviewing you for a year. I've seen every move you make. And I remember, and he said, you know, I'll be here for 6 months for a transition and a handover. And at Christmas he left and he came back and he gave me a 1 week handover. And he was like, here you go. So I got definitely thrown in the deep end with that job. Definitely, but loved it.
So let's talk about that. So now you're 32 years of age, right? You're a CEO. We talked earlier in our chat about, you know, the challenges with finance and some other aspects of the business. But now you're the leader of people. So I want to focus in at this point on your leadership of people, because, you know, your success now is really not relevant anymore. It's your people's success and obviously Mccann's success. How did you make that jump from, you know, being successful, doing the things you were doing, being creative, you know, successful with clients, etc., to now being the leader of people?
I suppose the key thing for me in terms of, you know, building teams and talent, and I think part of it was I had to really check myself, because I liked to hire people like me. So when I was in Mccann's, like I loved exuberant, energetic, positive, let's get the thing done, don't put it off. And I remember kind of thinking to myself, and I can't remember whether it was coaching or whether it was somebody gave me advice, but I remember thinking like, you gotta have a really good mix of, you know, like the detail-oriented people who would look at contracts, or people who would look at the finance side, or the, you know, the devil's in the detail, to use another cliche. But I really realized very quickly that I had to get out of my, you know, because when I work with people, I love people who are like me. You know, we always get on really well. I had a walk there at lunchtime with Miriam Hughes, who was the CEO of DDFH&B, and she's quite like me. She's full of chat, she's full of energy, and I just hit it off. But I think part of the big kind of recognition for me is that, and also to make sure that the people who aren't like me feel valued by me. So, you know, I think sometimes in business, if you've got a like-minded people around you that you really get on with, that are, you know, have some of the same profile and characteristics that you do, then other people with different characteristics might feel that you don't value that as much. And I think I've learned that a lot too, which is how to ensure that, you know, everything, no matter what your profile or where your strengths are, that everybody has a role to play and a contribution to make, and it's of equal value. I definitely learned that.
It's a smashing point, because we are all individual, you know, so you and I would be positive people, so we can engage on that positivity level. But that doesn't mean that people who are, you know, less extrovert, or people who are quieter, or people who are less chatty, or whatever description that people put on individuals, can't contribute to a team. And as CEO, to recognize that was really astute, because a team is made up of all different individuals. What was the biggest challenge for you in your time as CEO of Mccann?
I think, to be honest, being female was a challenge. So, you know, I was the first woman, you know, at that time, being boss of an agency network. And I remember a client coming in one day to meet me after Peter Davies had written the letter saying, Orlaith's the new boss, and, you know, she'll be ringing you for a coffee and a chat about your account. And I remember the client, who I shall not name, a man, and he came into our reception in Mccann's, and he patted me on the head and said, God, you're a great girl. And I know what he meant, but I think initially because I was young, but also because our industry was, you know, led by men. And it gave me a real, I suppose, passion around equity, and, you know, very popular subject around gender equity and diversity in business, and making sure. And I was president of IAPI, and myself and a fantastic lady called Tanya Bonotti, you know, it was basically all men on the board. And, you know, we went in, and I was on the board, and she was the chief exec of the organization, and it was the industry body for advertising. And we made a very determined strategic decision to get balance into the board. And like, that's going back like 15 years ago. You know, so I'm very passionate about that equity, diversity, and that kind of making sure that, and look, the pace is very slow, Tim. I'm sure you see it yourself, and we all do. And I just don't quite know what's going to, beyond quotas, get it to click that there's a really good value, and not an argument around businesses are more profitable if they have diversity. Just there's 50% men, 50% women in the country. Like, why can we not really work towards just better balance and equity in business? I'm very passionate. I've been involved a lot in that kind of agenda over my career, and I care about it deeply.
I want to talk to you a bit about that because it's a very important item to discuss. You're passionate for it, and as you say, I have an issue with quotas. I actually have an issue with quotas. Now, I understand, that quotas are deemed relevant because to get people from one point to another. But I do have an issue. I've always believed it's the best people should get the job. Okay, being in any environment, male or female or any gender, that is working in the environment today. And I spoke actually at an international women's conference 2 years ago. I think it was one of the few men to actually be ever asked to speak.
We need more men at these conferences instead of girls.
And I think it was very funny, and I really enjoyed it. I look forward to getting invited to speak at more of these because I really enjoyed speaking at this event. But one of the questions came to me afterwards, and from a lady in the audience, and she said it's because most of the people in the audience were ladies, which I found was disappointing. Personally, I found that was disappointing. There was 3 men in the audience who were there because the chief executive, who was a man, said you must be there. So I thought that the gender mix was not good on the day. But anyway, this lady asked me a question. She said, it's kind of easy right now to make the point that you believe in equality and you believe in gender equality, and because it's now the PC thing to do.
Yes.
And I got great pride over in saying that in the year 2000, which is 21 years ago, I built a company for An Post called One Direct, which is now rebranded as An Post Insurance.
Yeah.
And my executive team in the year 2000 was Tim McCarthy and 6 females.
That deserves a round of applause.
When it wasn't PC. And I remember being asked by a journalist, why? And I said, because they were the best people for the job. So that's why my issues with quotas, but I do understand the challenge. When you take the challenge of gender equality, and you're heavily involved, as you say, where can women be better in getting it to be more equal?
I think there's a kind of a more of a courageousness required, and a confidence. And I think, a lot of the language that, women are pushy or she's bossy, there's a lot of work done on the language around women who, lean in or kind of push themselves forward. And we got to get over ourselves around that. And I think partly I often, witness really fantastic women in meetings that might be not gender balanced or diverse enough, and they don't speak. And they have amazing points to make, and they are super brilliant. And God, surrounded by phenomenal female engineers in Irish Water. And I see all the time that there's a kind of a reluctance to speak up and speak out. And even for myself, when you're in very male-dominated environments, no more than a man sitting with 10 women, he doesn't ask my husband to go to anything with those old girls or fashion shows, and he's like, oh, I'm not going to that, because it's surrounded by women. And I said, how do you think we felt for the last 50 years? So I think the courageousness and the confidence and, to commit, even you sometimes find when women are asked to speak, that kind of their voice wobbles a bit and they just get a bit nervous. And I think that's not a good thing, because the voice that needs to be heard needs to be heard.
You've hit it on the head. Not just females, in this case, we're talking about females, but people need to be courageous and speak up when they have something to say. And what tends to happen in all genders is that, many of them don't. But particularly for females to get more equality, they've got to be courageous enough to contribute more. I work with female clients at chief executive level and senior executive, C-suite level. And some of them say to me, I'd love to be a man. And I say, don't be a man. Just be the best you can be yourself. You don't have to act like a man to be a really good chief executive or C-suite person. You just have to act like a really good C-suite person or chief executive, as a female, which you are. So courage is, to me, the most important trait of a leader. The most important trait of a leader, not their skill set, their technical knowledge, the courage to do the right thing every day. And, that's a brilliant point for females who will listen to this podcast. you must have the courage to speak up, you know, and it's not happening as quickly as it should, this gender balance. There's no doubts in that. I know the 30% Club are doing a lot of work to try and get it to move forward. But there is more senior chief executives and senior C-suite people being appointed in the female gender over the last number of years, and that will be a big benefit, I believe, going forward.
Do you think, like, you know, no matter what gender, like in a tough, courageous call in a meeting that might not be a popular opinion, or if you just go with the flow, like it can be career limiting. I've seen it. People who call out problems, and I've seen it at the top level in organizations with clients in my Mccann days. I've seen it like widely in business. Like, you know, courageous means you need to take a position, and you need to also be prepared to deal with the consequences. And sometimes there's that fine line between making the call and thinking, gosh, if I push this really hard. So there's a skill in that too, in terms of navigating to get your voice heard. Or is this the battle I really should fight? Is this a small point of view, bigger picture in terms of actually where we need to be focusing our energy? And like I would say for myself, I've often gotten down to the little small thing that's really annoying me or irritating me, you know, with various bosses. And they're like, "Well, in the overall scheme of things here, like, let it go." And I'm like, but it's really important to me. And we've got to get, like, you do learn in business to get that perspective that this is a battle you love to fight, but actually in the overall scheme of the bigger strategic context or the debate you're having, don't put your energy fighting that little point. And that's, you learn when you get it wrong, believe me. You learn when you get it wrong and you regret it, and you pick up yourself the next day and go, "God, I didn't make the right call that day." And that just comes down to experience, Tim. I think that just comes down to experience.
When I'm coaching clients, I make the point to them: only fight battles that win the war. Yeah. Don't fight battles that win skirmishes, which is what you just said there, you know?
Yeah, that's much better put than I put it, Tim.
Tell me about your time at the moment in Irish Water, because, you know, COVID has been very difficult. And, you know, it's funny, if you go back 15 months, Irish Water was in the headlines frequently about a whole lot of issues, okay? And really hasn't been in the headlines in the last 15 months. So what's it been like in Irish Water during the past 15 months?
I think when I joined the business probably 4 or 5 years ago, you know, trust and confidence in Irish Water was probably at its lowest point. And look, you know, we could go back over the old ground on the politics and the media and the hammering the business got, and, you know, that you know, that's the past. I think the critical thing for me, I suppose, was when I joined, like everybody else, when I joined the business, I was exactly of the same view. Irish Water, you know, getting it wrong everywhere, not very good at what they do, no real leadership or like what's going on here in terms of, and look, there's loads of factors around why it got so difficult and nasty. And no more than the banks, you know, when people were afraid to say where they worked, like people were genuinely terrified to say I worked in Irish Water. And I remember people saying to me when I took the role for, you know, looking at the comms in Irish, are you absolutely, what are you doing? And all I can say to you is that the country absolutely depends on water and wastewater services to grow our economy. Make sure that the health and well-being of Irish people is looked after. And a bit like what I pointed to earlier, what's under the hood of what needs to be done? You switch on your shower, you drink your glass of water, you boil your potatoes, and you never think for 1 second what actually goes in to making that a service for you, that it's safe to drink, and that the infrastructure, and like we're going to spend close to €1 billion this year, like €1 billion, fixing and, you know, upgrading our infrastructure. Even just, we've 63,000 kilometers of pipe right now, and, you know, over 40% that's actually leaking. So just think about that reality of managing that and fixing it and investing in it and digging up roads and making consumers fed up and businesses fed up. And what I was really struck with is it's a bit like getting the insight on the vaccine rollout for the HSE. Once you listen and you understand, not just about the size and scale and the complexity of doing it and really delivering in terms of taking people's wastewater away and into Ringsend, where 40% of the country's waste goes, and the small site it's on, and the investment that needs to be made. I've been blown away, and I don't say this lightly, by the talent in Irish Water. engineers, scientists, expertise. And that's a whole side of the organization that people don't know enough about. And we've been doing a lot of, we made a documentary, like a plug here now, like I'm on Tommy Tiernan, a documentary called The Story of Water. And, it's on YouTube, it's on our website. It did appear on Virgin Media there last year a couple of times. But it just gives you an insight of what's involved in leakage and the scale of the infrastructure and what happens when we get no water, which we had, very severely in 2018. And the people in our organization are so committed to solving the problem, so committed. And it takes vast amounts of expertise that I was just like that. When I worked in advertising and worked with all different clients, I thought I knew everything about everything. That's I'm not saying that. I'd seen the world. I'd worked cervical check with Tony O'Brien. I'd worked on board Bia's Origin Green, Heineken, Coke, you name it, childhood obesity. I felt I had the whole comms thing wrapped up. And then I walk into an organization that I have no familiarity with, no understanding of in terms of the engineering that's required to deliver water for this country. And as I said, I really learned. And I think the other thing for me was it's complicated. The stuff is complicated. And I think back to my days in Bank of Ireland, we launched PIPs and PEPs. And I remember saying to the bank guys, like, what is this PIPs and PEPs thing? And I was the comms person advising them from the agency. And we ended up doing this mailing to clients with, it's basically how to, that your money grows. We got a packet of seeds and we put the leaflet on the packet of seeds that they could grow and see that this is about growing the money you put in, that you would get more out at the end of the day. But I found in Irish Water that there was so much technical complexity and so much opportunity to simplify this, tell stories, bring people, involve them. And that's a lot of the work we've been doing, just kind of in terms of just content creation. And that for me has been a big step change to get people to understand the size of scale, but also the expertise and complexity around actually delivering. And it's going to take, time. Time, I suppose, that you'd love to be out spending vast amounts of money on communication. And that's not our reality either. The money needs to go into fixing the pipes, fixing the leaks. So we have very limited budgets for investing in communication, and we're, subject to public procurement and all that. So we're not doing big ad campaigns or big, communication strategies in the same way that the fast-moving consumer goods sector would do it. But we have done some really good stuff in, social media and PR media, working with journalists to get them to understand before reporting a negative thing. Let's get balance into the article. And that's been a big focus for us too, which is, yes, there's a problem here, but the context is this plant has been around for 150 years and never had any money spent on it. So it's not in great shape. Discuss. So anyway, I'm really enjoying it too.
That's obvious. There's no doubt that's obvious. And your passion for it comes across. And also your passion for the people that are there. A couple of interesting things I've learned about you. Your use of words as a communicator is fascinating. But one word that really seems to irritate you is this word that's now become, commonplace in the marketplace is pivoting, right? Okay, so you don't like the word pivot. But you've easily adopted the word productive instead of busy. So why have you such an issue with this word pivot? Because you dropped in the middle of the Irish Water talk there, a step change. Other people would have dropped in, we pivoted. So just interested in why you don't like that word.
I actually can't explain my intense dislike for that word. Every time I hear it, I go, I'm not a big fan. I mean, I know I use the word productive, but I am absolutely a fan of simple language, like full stop. Like, why make all these titles and complexity around? And look, the digital communication business is famous for it. It's like, what are you actually programmatic? Like, and every industry has it. But I even would say to this day, like, I really do try and make the words I use when I'm communicating like a child could understand it. And I think, anybody in business who's trying to communicate clearly and simply, like, why make it complicated? Why make it difficult for people to understand? So the word pivot is it just stresses me out. We had a little Twitter feed going for a while on words that irritate people, and journeying is another one. Tell me about your career journey. Oh, stop! So I think there's just a few. It's nothing particularly against the word pivot that I was as a child. Somebody used it and I hated it or anything like that. It's just I'm not a fan of jargon. Just getting to the point, like.
And that actually really is important for communication that the more simple we make it, the more we give people a chance to listen to it. Because the more jargon, you talk about pips and peps, and when you take that, I worked in different organizations as chief executive, but there was acronyms in some of I founded some greenfield companies, and then I went into legacy businesses. But there was acronyms in the legacy businesses, and I remember my first day saying, "Can you give me a list of what these mean?" Because I don't know what they mean. And people said, "Well, we do," but I said, "You're supposed to explain to me. I mean, you're supposed," and that's the one thing that simple communication really does, or it allows people in any difficult situation understand it as best as they can from their own interpretation of the.
Like I made a big kind of, I wouldn't say mistake, but a learning, I suppose, maybe that's a better language. But I remember going into Irish Water, and like I had a history of, I suppose, the jargon that went with our industry, in terms of the advertising side and production and, the digital world. And there was a lot of language that almost to my kind of, detriment, I kind of had to start really realizing that these are things that, wider people don't really, they're not working in that industry in the same way I don't understand the language in depth about engineering and pressure on pipes and all the different language that they use. So I think probably the genuine kind of commitment around making communication as simple and clear as possible is so powerful. When you hear somebody chatting, just telling a story, giving their personal perspective, and I put a lot of emphasis in when people say, God, here's Orla with her storytelling demand. But like when you get a 50-page technical document about a problem with a water treatment plant, like, so what's actually going on here? So the stuff's going into the plant. Well, ragging. What's ragging? So baby wipes. Okay, let's talk about baby wipes. Let's talk about the stuff that's like, let's get away from that complexity. And that's been a big learning in the engineering part of the work that I do, is try and make that stuff simple.
It's been an absolute pleasure listening to your story, from your start in Temple Oak through to being head girl in second level, through to the challenging entry into college and how you come through that, and then through your career where people were at the center of everything that you did. And that was so obvious, not just your technical skill as a communicator and as somebody successful in marketing, but in the interest in people. Your equality agenda, which is so important in the modern world for all of us in business and in society. But just the fact that you care about people, you have an interest in people. It's a great story, and thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us today.
Thank you for watching The Mindset Shift. For more episodes, check out www.talenthub.ie/The Mindset Shift.